Hi guys. For those of you who showed up now, welcome to the Finance Magnates London Summit 2018. So, it seems that the Wild West atmosphere that defined the ICO world is waning. While some regulators are still grappling with the concept and the practices of ICOs, others are making headway in legislation and directives. Our legal and industry expert will explore the latest developments in the APAC and Europe regions and explain the approach of the various regulators to token projects. So, Teana, please take it from here.
Thank you. So good morning. I'm Teana Baker-Taylor. I'm an advisory council member at Global Digital Finance. We're an industry body that works with industry participants to... I'm going to stand up here for a second. Is that all right? Just because I'm not really needed for later. I'm superfluous. Anyway, so regulators around the world are still grappling with ICOs, as Michael said. Ambiguity around regulation continues, and we're seeing regulators beginning to take action in a number of areas. So just a couple points to kick us off. In September, a U.S. federal judge ruled that U.S. security laws may cover ICOs, potentially giving security regulators in that jurisdiction legal purview to regulate this market. The SEC also has recently opened dozens of cases involving ICOs, and just last week we saw the SEC settle with the founder of EtherDelta, charging him specifically with operating an unregistered securities exchange. From a global perspective, standard bodies too have started to amend the recommendations. The Financial Action Task Force recently published changes to their principles which clarify how they should apply to virtual assets, namely around KYC and AML. For example, conducting customer due diligence and ongoing transaction monitoring and reporting suspicious activities, which I think the majority of our panelists here already do today. We'll ask Blair how that works at Circle. So I'm joined today by legal and regulatory experts to explore the latest developments in the global regulatory landscape. So it's my pleasure to welcome Aleks Nowak, Chief Listings Officer at BlockEx. Chen, founder of the Australian Cryptocurrency Business Association, and Blair Halliday, European Director of Compliance and MLRO for Circle. So guys, thanks for having us. So I'll just kick it off. It seems that the ICO market has actually been slowing in recent months. Token data reports that ICO raises are down by 94% from February, when ICOs raised about $2.6 billion. In October, they only raised $198 million, so huge difference. But the overall annual number is still pretty huge, about $12 billion. But the air does seem to be deflating from this bubble. So I'll open up the first question to everyone on the panel. What do you attribute the slowdown in ICO raises to, and is it an indeed response to the regulatory uncertainty? Aleks, why don't you take it away first?
So I mean, we've been operating an ICO platform since I guess October last year, and certainly what we've seen in terms of revenues coming through the platform has probably been reflective of what Tina's just said there. I'm not so certain that the slowdown is really due to regulatory uncertainty, though. I think that we had some pretty clear definition last year on what the difference between a utility token and a security token was, and people were already starting to apply some of those principles for the most part. Certainly platform providers were, although of course many issuers were doing sort of self-help raises, and arguably, of course, that could be okay, because if I want to issue a private security and sell it myself, as long as I'm not using an intermediary, then that's pretty okay in most jurisdictions as well. But I think the reality is that the air has sort of come out of the bubble, because people have started to realize that utility tokens are just that. They are utility tokens which are designed to be used within a platform, and the reality is that probably from a speculative perspective, you don't want to be going to buy a utility token for the purpose of speculation. You're effectively pre-selling revenue as an issuer in that scenario, and therefore you need to have a very targeted marketing campaign to your customer base that you anticipate will want to use that token. And I think the vast majority of utility token ICO sales have still gone to speculators in the past, and I think speculators have become wise to the fact that that it's indeed not an investment, right? As I think probably everybody clearly stated in their white papers and legal opinions that released one, because securities will give a better return because they have some tangible upside, as opposed to just hoping that the value of something goes up.
Yeah.
So is that on?
Blair.
To add to this point, I think that's I think everything combined has probably contributed rather than particularly regulatory issues. I think the relatively recent release by the FCA, where they've reiterated the point that they don't believe it has any intrinsic value, is probably kind of added to the whole kind of mix. And then you've got other issues relating to, you referred to kind of Wild West regulation or lack of. So I think it's more of a case of maybe the consumer or the wider industry becoming more kind of aware of what the value is and isn't of something. So I think it's whether it's that in itself, probably not, but I think it's certainly contributed to the kind of slowing down of the market.
Chris, what's the situation like in Asia and specifically Australia, where you're based?
Before I start my answer, I just want to briefly introduce myself about my background. Well, we apart from being the representative of AS Corporate, and we also run the law firm in Sydney, which provides specific service towards ICO regulation and compliance service towards the digital currency exchange in Australia. So basically, there are several reasons. One, I would say, because we all know like 70% of all the funds contributed to ICO projects were coming from Asia, and 80% of them coming from mainland China. So when the Chinese government started to ban it since last November, actually it caused a huge impact on it. And also, according to the statistics released by the Chinese authority, 96% of the ICO projects launched in China last year, they were frauds. And a lot of individual investors lost money. And also, actually, it this impact to other investors in other Asian countries as well. And individual investors, they tend to be more cautious. It's unlike last year. Everyone, as long as, you have ICO project, I can make loads of money once I subscribe to your tokens. Mm-hmm. I will just do it. But now, no. A lot of people, they started to do their own due diligence as well. One good example was, the do nothing token. I don't know if any of you have heard of that. It was an ICO last year. Basically, it's just do nothing token. You just give me the Ethereum. That's it. I would do nothing with this.
Well, at least they were
But he raised
honest,
money,
right?
Chris.
Yeah. I think they raised
transparent.
$250,000 US. Yeah. And particularly this year, a lot of government they started to step in, right? We know that SEC has issued their reports how to define security token. And a lot of, like in Australia, ASIC, which is FCA in UK, they created such innovation hub, which is to educate and also to follow up with all those ICO project issuers in Australia. And this year, they have stopped 5 ICO projects in Australia because those ICO projects being stopped were involving a lot of misleading statements.
Yeah. So let's stick with Asia while we're here for the moment. So, there's been a number of recent announcements. The Japanese regulator, the FSA, released a report in September, which said that they will begin to conduct regular on-site examinations of exchanges that they give licenses to, and that they're going to develop their own internal crypto team to facilitate this. Earlier this month, the Hong Kong Securities and Futures Commission announced a new framework to license and regulate crypto funds and exchanges, so we can talk a little bit about that. What was interesting about that was that they've basically said that asset managers in Hong Kong can hold up to 10% of their portfolio without doing anything in crypto. Absolutely fine. Anything over that, or crypto-only funds, need to satisfy a number of requirements and conditions that need to be met. But going back to the sandbox, they also announced that they are going to grant licenses in a test and see environment, in a sandbox environment, to exchanges. So, I think if we couple that with the SEC also announcing that they're going to implement a pseudo sandbox environment, this advisory, come in and talk to us about your project before you go ahead and issue it. The FCA has a sandbox. We're starting to see regulators look to be a little bit more collaborative, I think, with this space as they're trying to understand what the issues are. So maybe if we just go back this way, what does that look like in Asia more broadly?
Like in Hong Kong, before this sandbox examination was announced, basically in Hong Kong there was no regulation at all towards ICO. That's why a lot of Asian companies, they tend to do this in Hong Kong, and a lot of based in Singapore as well. And of course, Hong Kong government has always been trying to learn from the industry. And this is a very good example. They are started to regulate this to make it proper. And but this sandbox is only targeting the exchanges only. I don't think it's if I don't get it wrong, it's...
I think the sandbox is for exchanges, but the framework for funds is actual published framework for those portfolio managers that are taking customer deposits. Assets.
Yeah, I remember it's not targeting at all the exchanges, but the exchanges or the brokers which got involved in the trading of cryptos.
Yeah.
In general, the FCA and other regulators across Europe, I think, certainly FCA have a mandate to encourage industry in comparison to certain other regulators. So with that, it doesn't, I think the sandbox that we're referring to here is Sandbox 2. There's the second iteration.
Yep.
So it doesn't...
Four.
Oh, there you go.
Yes.
There you go. So I think, and as a kind of an industry and certainly as a company, we're in relatively regular dialogue with the regulator and certainly the FCA, and they're very kind of interested in understanding the space better. And I think, that dialogue and also understanding kind of the nuts and bolts of things from the inside out, is a key component to getting the regulator to continue to come up with an informed opinions and comments, because that's the only way we're going to proceed forward. So from my point of view, I think it's something to be celebrated.
Yeah, I mean, we're very lucky here in the UK and broadly across Europe. I think that for the most part, if something is not explicitly a regulated activity, then it doesn't mean it's illegal. It just means that it's unregulated.
Yep.
Whereas I think certainly in a lot of Asian countries, from my experience, unless it's permitted, it's illegal. Which makes innovation very, very difficult. And we had some experience in Taiwan over the last few years with that kind of environment, and it just stifled the business there. We closed the office eventually. The FCA have been very, very good with us. I mean, we're in the FCA sandbox in cohort 4 for our bond platform. And we've had a lot of engagement with them over the years, but I think there is still a huge gap in knowledge within regulators. They certainly have some people that are very knowledgeable, but from my experience, there's only a handful of them within each of these organisations, and the knowledge isn't very well promulgated. So, there is a definite danger still that people are. Reacting to the tabloid media press of the finance world, with their news stories and information, and the standard of journalism with accurate information around this space is frankly appalling, and for people who have access to no other information, for that to be a primary source is extremely dangerous.
Yeah.
We see even entities like the Financial Times publishing articles which are just full of hot air and nonsense, essentially, and very ill-informed. But I think that there is some upside to that. The stuff that Crypto UK and other people have been doing, all-party parliamentary group and stuff like that here in the UK, and actually getting a voice for industry in to speak to these people and to educate them. But again, it's always to a small audience of people. And I think this is one of the biggest threats that we have as an industry, certainly here in the UK at the moment, is a lot of the people that are sat in policy teams, who this may fall under their purview for that particular market sector. If it comes under a particular sort of domain or gets lumped in with, wholesale markets or whoever writes the futures policies or whatever else, you'll end up with a non-expert drafting policy about things that they don't actually know anything about apart from sensationalized nonsense. And this is, I think, if there were ever a message to the regulator, it'd be to make sure that when this stuff gets pushed down, that the people have appropriate access to information.
Well, and we see them undertaking a number of consultations, right? So the Crypto Assets Task Force has just released their report after, a considerable consultation across industry. I think probably all of us were in one of the workshops at some point. And then in Europe, we've seen, policymakers be curious, but still equally a little bit cautious still. So EU finance ministers met in September and agreed not to rush putting in place regulation before taking another look and another consultation. And at the same time, we're seeing specific EU markets push forward attempts to attract crypto industry participants such as Gibraltar, Malta, Switzerland, with their progressive regulatory frameworks. And then, France is looking at putting in place a regulatory framework specifically for ICOs on the back of Macron's efforts to improve business and technology growth within France. So, Aleks, I'll keep it with you for a second, and then I'll take it over to Blair. But so BlockEx supports the issuance of ICOs and trading, right? So from a European perspective, what's your view on this regulatory arbitrage across Europe and other markets, Bermuda? There's another.
Well, I think it's a little bit dangerous that the fact that we have all of these small bespoke regulatory frameworks coming into place. If you setting Switzerland aside because it's not technically part of the EU, so it has a little bit more autonomy. But if you look at what Gibraltar's done, look at what Malta's done, you've got a very bespoke set of regulations, which don't get me wrong, is fantastic that regulators are paying attention, and they're not terribly drafted, but at the end of the day, they're quite sticky pieces of legislation that are designed to force companies to engage service providers within those domiciles. A and B, they're also only really valid within the domicile that the legislation is created in. And you've got two very tiny domestic markets. Gibraltar has something like 30, 40,000 people, and Malta has 10 times that much, right? So, in terms of your actual regulatory protection, it's negligible when you look at where your market's going to be addressed, and you're still faced with this unregulated state outside. And I think what actually has to happen at a more overarching level is that somebody like ESMA needs to actually take a proper keen interest in this, and I don't mean take a proper keen interest and have a knee-jerk reaction and come and push some stuff out because they think they have to. They need to learn about it and understand it properly. But we need to see some kind of guidance, or at least a case law recognition of these asset classes within MiFID II, for example, or some clear precedent that they're going to fall outside of MiFID II. Because actually at that point, then you can start to engage the huge amount of legislation that already exists for securities markets.
And I don't think we're going to see that until at least after the EU elections in March, right? So they're electing a whole new legislature.
Nothing will happen between now and then because we've got Christmas in the way, right? So nobody's going to be doing any work in the EU until probably mid-February. But ultimately that's what needs to happen, because we already have a fairly complex set of regulations, surrounding securities markets and existing licenses like MTFs, OTFs, and what I would have a preference in seeing is to see that these asset classes, at least in some way or another, get captured under MiFID II, so that you can use all of those existing reporting mechanisms. The regulators don't have to suddenly adapt to something new. They can receive it on the forms that they're already receiving it, deal with the information the way that they already deal with it. Because ultimately the technology is actually entirely secondary to the product. Yes, it provides a lot of efficiencies surrounding it. We can make things cheaper, faster, less counterparty risk, and all of those great things. But from a regulatory perspective, what the regulator cares about is consumer protection, the monitoring of systems and processes, and actually none of those things really have changed. In fact, we can make it a lot easier because we can stream data to them in real time that's coming out of markets. But fundamentally, we still need a mechanism to deliver that to them. And there is one already. They just need to let us use it.
Blair, I just wanted to say, or I wanted to ask you, what's the impact on your team, leading a compliance function? You've got this kind of patchwork quilt of independent jurisdictions saying this is okay, that's okay. Then you've got, different jurisdictions that have more strict rules, less strict rules. How does this affect your team and how you practically run a business?
Yeah, look, I think there's two answers to that. I think holistically, to kind of continue on to that point there, is that yes, it's fantastic that some of these areas are starting to develop their own kind of frameworks and kind of ideas behind all of this technology and crypto, etc. The reality is that they are restricted or to their own jurisdictions. The most exciting one, I guess, right at this point is the French component, because realistically, that's one of the really big European players and global players, and I think them kind of moving so far forward on that gives them an opportunity to kind of lead the way, and it has more of a chance of developing a framework that could be applied or adopted by the rest of Europe. But so that it's from that point of view, it's exciting. I think when it comes to regulation, from my perspective, it's very cyclical. Certainly in Europe, it's kind of we move from the money laundering directives to the next PSD to the next MiFID, et cetera, et cetera. And so the next cab off the rank is the 4.5 or 5th money laundering directive, depending on your flavour on that. And I'm certainly part of the working group that's helping to define JMOSG's kind of view on how to apply that for virtual currencies. And I think we should, and there's a lot of discussion about what is and what is not a custodial or a non-custodial wallet. What is a virtual currency? What is a cryptocurrency, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess my point for that, from a holistic point of view, is that that might not be the kind of the silver bullet that clears up everything, but what it is starting to do is define and give regulators a better idea of what the definitions of some of these key components are.
Taxonomy, a common vernacular.
Exactly, and so the reality is that that will be a key component of that, and getting and kind of moving that into what it's like for a compliance function within my environment. The reality is, whether it's regulated or not, we have obligations as a company to apply a standard, and so I've never really kind of bought into the kind of view. We're regulated and authorised by the FCA as an e-money institution, and so there is an expectation by the FCA and certainly banking partners and other vendors that we will apply a standard that is applicable to an authorised and regulated company, and so. To my point of view, it's relatively straightforward in the sense that we don't diverge too much in terms of this jurisdiction are applying this or they're considering that. Realistically, from a compliance and certainly kind of a anti-financial crime point of view, we have zero tolerance. We accept, like any industry, that there are going to be bad actors and bad players, but the tolerance is such that we do whatever we can to kind of avoid that. So it's pretty straightforward. We apply a very similar standard.
So that raises an interesting question around industry best practice and driving some self-regulating behaviors. So BlockEx is part of Crypto UK, Circle is part of GDF, which I'm part of. You're setting up an association in Asia. So guys, how do we, in the face of this regulatory ambiguity globally, start to instill best practice about what looks good?
Well, I think to sort of follow on from what you said, I don't think there really is that much ambiguity in terms of what your obligations are. Yes, the fact that cryptocurrencies are perhaps not explicitly defined as money, but let's just assume that they are money. Then I think following the spirit of 4th AML directive and soon to be whether it's 4.5 or 5th. It's pretty straightforward to apply it across the board. I mean, of course, the 5th will wrap some stuff up around crypto directly, but I think standard sort of KYC checks, PSD2, for payment stuff and conducting AML checks. I think it's pretty clear.
What about things though, like, so I'll put you on the spot a little bit. Reports around wash trading, prop trading with customer funds, monetizing customer liquidations. So going back to the press isn't always fair, and we know this, right? They're sometimes misinformed and sometimes it's clickbait. But we know that some of these volumes aren't what they say they are.
So look, but that's more of a moral matter, for a platform operator. If it were a regulated market, those things would be explicitly illegal and you could go to prison, right? And I think if you just run your business as if it's regulated, then, it's pretty clear that you shouldn't facilitate those sorts of things. Customer funds are sacrosanct. You shouldn't be touching them. They need to be segregated. They need to be protected. Unless you happen to be a bank that has the appropriate licenses, to divest customers' funds, to pay interest or whatever. And I think certainly, as far as I know, the only exchange that has a banking license is Bitstamp, probably in Luxembourg. But even then, I don't think that covers them for trading their customer funds, right? There's a lot of corrupt practices within our industry, unfortunately. And that's come from the fact that there's a lot of anonymity or pseudo-anonymity and offshore operations and, being...
I think the line between illegal and unethical, right? So...
Yeah, and let's be clear, none of those things are illegal because it's not regulated.
That's right, yeah.
So
that's what I'm saying. How do we,
it's
as
about
an
a moral
industry,
compass,
instill
right?
that best practice?
And certainly I know I can speak for Crypto UK that we have a code of conduct which everybody has to sign up to and agree. And that covers all of those sorts of things, corrupt business practices and AML, KYC, and adherence to the spirit of regulation, even if it doesn't exist, right now. And and I think as a membership, we cover already the majority of companies that are very active within the UK.
Yeah.
And I think I think you guys are still coming to join us. Yeah.
Not my party.
But and so I think we should pretty much have everybody wrapped up within that. We have us, we have eToro, we have Coinbase, we have Ripple now. I think blockchain are coming in to join us, and so that's already that's most of the UK market.
Yeah. Chris, what is your association doing in Australia?
We basically work together with ADCA, which is Australian Digital Commerce Association, and we also, we work together to develop the code of conduct as well, and we also the actual member of that, including our law firm. And basically, first of all, you need to have very strong and very good internal corporate governance in place, including the menu, how you actually keep the wallet, things like that. And also, you must have very good compliance program in terms of AML and KYC. And we intend to create and apply the much higher standard, based on the principles of the laws, legislation in Australia.
Okay, great. So I think we have about 5 minutes left. Are you keen to take any questions? Should we throw it out there? Does anybody have any questions? I'll run down with a microphone if you do. Come on,
really
somebody
hard
must
ones,
have a
please.
question. No? Really? Okay. I'll give you each a minute or two to give me your summary statement. What's the next 12 months look like?
I think the next 12 months will be interesting because we're starting to see the market push across to security token offerings, and I think people are starting to become more adept in understanding the regulation. I guess it depends how quickly regulators will stand up, to actually make a clear precedent for a framework under which they should operate, i.e. an existing framework, which of the existing frameworks they should operate upon.
Yeah.
I guess there's potential that if a regulated investment exchange somewhere were to stand up some of this technology, then that could be an interesting thing within the market. because they have different access globally and a different standing globally. So even a small jurisdiction's exchange could do something quite interesting. But the thing is that 12 months in blockchain is like 10 years in another industry.
Yeah.
So who knows? We might all be dead by then, right?
Blair, I'll put you on the spot a little bit. What do you see happening in the stablecoin fiat pegged space? Fiat coin. I know we're still getting to grips with what the vernacular is there, but you guys have just launched one, so.
Yeah, well, I see that. So that's issued by Centre, so I see that flourishing and doing very, very well. And I'm sure our co-founders and other members of the Centre consortium will be very happy to see that do very well as well. To be honest, I think it's an integral part of the market as it is now. I think probably what we'll eventually see is more of an understanding of what that is and how it's used, and getting a little bit more, dare I say, a little bit more user friendly for those that aren't necessarily au fait with how it works, and I think a broadening of the market and the interest in it in general. But Centre, which is obviously, as I say, the offshoot from Circle and a variety of other institutions, it's certainly kind of a view to contribute to the tokenization of everything. So from that point of view, I'd like to see that kind of develop and flourish further. I think, further on to the points that have already been raised, I think this year will be very interesting. With the directive coming out, money laundering directive coming out, and probably being in place kind of by the back end of this year, I think that'll be a key step in defining regulation as we go forward. So I think it's an exciting time and an exciting space.
Chris?
I think in the next 12-month period, STO will be very hot, and because it's already very hot in Asia, particularly in China. Those investors, particularly institutional investors, they tend to invest those projects issuing security token. And also, as Aleks said, the regulators in Australia, they are using the existing framework to regulate, to try to regulate, and also try to learn. For example, Auscheck, they've issued the questionnaire to all the exchange operators in Australia. Ask them what you are doing and what coins are available for trading on your platform, and what method, what technology are you using. They are trying to learn. And also from 2nd of January next year, every exchange operators must prepare and launch compliance report with Auscheck as well. So, and the due date is end of March. I do believe after March, there will be a new guide be released by the government. Yeah, and also in relation to the ICO or STO, ASIC is using they recommend you do by way of Australia's financial service license to do it. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much, you guys, for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.